All right, I am live. Welcome back to another episode of Mysteries After Dark. I am your host, Jerry. So, if you are in the Midwest like I am, this weather is not fun. We have the cold and, of course, the wind that goes along with it, and it's just miserable out there. Well, for those over 30, I think those of my listeners that are in their, 20s and teens, they probably love this. I'm old. I don't. I'm over it. I'm ready for spring and summer, or I don't know, perhaps relocating somewhere for about, 3.5 months out of the year where it doesn't snow would be lovely. So, all right, I want to let all of you know up front. This is going to be a longer episode, but hopefully it will be worth it. We're going to get detailed on some of this, and just real quickly, a while back I posted up on the page essentially asking people to give me ideas for an episode, and I would do one on that topic. I received a few messages asking me to do an episode on Bigfoot, and I love Bigfoot, so I'm definitely going to do an episode on Bigfoot. And I've touched on this topic on past episodes, but I think what I'm going to do is maybe have a couple of episodes or a few episodes, and each one cover a different, type of Bigfoot. And some of you might think that's weird. What do you mean, different types of Bigfoot? Well, just as there are, different types of humans and different types of primates, which we are a member of that family. Anyway, it would stand to reason that there are different types of Bigfoot as well. As returning listeners are aware, I do try to bring validity to these topics. Yes, the stories are amazing, and let's be honest, if my episodes were bombacious and loaded with flair, I would probably have a heck of a lot more viewers. Oh Lord. But that really was never the intent of my journey with doing this. I didn't want to just bring you the, fantastic. I also wanted to give you some evidence, some, substance behind them. And with these reports, we need a way to substantiate them. We need to bring validity and real evidence because, as I've stated in the past, if we're ever going to, truly understand the unusual, we need to find a way to bring the scientific community on board with us. Whenever I talk about topics like this, when we are, discussing cryptids and especially Bigfoot, there are some things that I need to remind people about. First off, Jane Goodall, the foremost primatologist on this planet, she absolutely believes that we could have a species of primate that, as of yet, is undiscovered and not accepted by mainstream science, roaming around the world. Wouldn't that be fun to walk up on something like that? Oh, I don't know. Secondly, though, the Bondo mystery ape, aka Billy Ape. This was nothing more than a fairy tale. It was just folklore passed down by, a primitive people. We had photos of these chimpanzees. People had foot casts. We had hair samples. But that was, just works of fiction and fakery. Then finally, in 2003, irrefutable evidence prevailed, and a team was sent to study these creatures. We had a large, unknown, undiscovered population of very unusual chimpanzees right under the noses of, academia, yet no one cared enough to pursue the evidence. And where I have an issue with this is the fact that there was less evidence for the Billy Ape than there is for Bigfoot. There were less sightings of those than there are of Bigfoot. There were less photos and foot casts of the Bondo mystery ape than there are of Bigfoot. And once the species, the billy ape, once it was confirmed, the issues didn't end there. To this day, the scientific community is arguing that these are nothing more than regular chimpanzees, even though DNA says otherwise. Even though these chimpanzees regularly walk on two legs like a human, even though some of the specimens have sagittal crests, even though these chimpanzees create sleeping areas similar to that of gorillas and primitive humans. They use tools, they hunt leopards, and they eat meat. These are not the actions of regular chimpanzees. So my point in bringing all of this up is to illustrate that science has a very real issue looking at any other evolutionary possibilities within our family tree. They want this neat linear progression, and that's not how it works. That idea has been blown out of the water for the last 40 years, and every time a new discovery is made, the box society, as I like to call them, the scientific community, they're perfectly comfortable being confined within their little cube. And these people have to be drug along, kicking and screaming to whatever new reality has emerged only because of irrefutable findings. It's never easy with them, and that's okay. So, excuse me. And, honestly, maybe every time I do an episode speaking about this creature or a cryptid, maybe I need to bring that point back up. Maybe I need to throw that in my repertoire. I feel like I need to reiterate the points that I just laid out there, before I do an episode about Bigfoot. Because despite all of this evidence, there are still large portions of the population that do not believe or will not even entertain the possibility that such creatures exist. So at some point, we really have to ask ourselves, why? Why is the evidence for this animal being suppressed? Why is its existence being hidden? And you know what? I might get to that later in the show. Also, if this is just some animal, why would it matter if the government openly said, hey guys, it's real? The only answers that I can come up with, it would perhaps somehow change the human evolutionary narrative. It would frighten citizens, or these creatures, perhaps they are not terrestrial. And that is a possibility which seems to have some evidence. For those unaware, in April 2022, thanks to a Freedom of Information Act request from the UK Sun-Times, the Pentagon released some documents, and they were groundbreaking. They confirmed EBEs, basically ETs, are here, along with some other disturbing facts, but the only part that's really, relevant to this topic was where it said that these visitors are the reason for Bigfoot sightings. Let that sink in for a few minutes. And to be honest, I have issues with the fact that these documents were released confirming several things which fall under the category of paranormal, yet the mainstream media does not talk about this. It was, quietly swept under the rug. Now, personally, I entertain several possibilities, and ultimately the answer will not come, unfortunately, until we have a body. Many natives and tribes from around the world have passed down stories that, these animals, they can just appear and vanish right before your eyes, perhaps lending credence to the extraterrestrial narrative. Perhaps they slip in and out from a parallel reality, another Earth with a Planck vibration close enough that our worlds can occasionally, overlap. And just a quick background about that idea. There was a scientist named Max Planck. He laid out essentially the foundation for quantum physics. He discovered, or rather, redefined atomic vibration or frequency. Okay, to keep it simple, atoms vibrate at whole numbers. Okay, let's say 2H, 3H, 4H, but never 1.5H or 2.5H. You get the idea. And I'm trying to keep this very rudimentary. But what if between those whole numbers, that's the parallel worlds? They exist within the fractions and occasionally synchronize with our reality. Just a thought. It could happen. Okay, but back to Bigfoot. Be it an unknown or alien entity, be it perhaps a surviving Gigantopithecus or even a Denisovan, I wanted to present you with, let's say, a subspecies that I find the most interesting or, I don't know, most compelling, okay? And it's not Sasquatch. I know. But Jerry, you live in the Midwest, you traitor. Yeah, I know, guys. I'm sorry. But to me, the European reports are the most compelling and more specifically, the Yeti or mink. Isn't that just a cool name? Oh, my throat's a little dry. So the Yeti or mink, also known as, are you ready? The Alma or Almasti in the Caucasus Mountains. The Almas, another name. The description is of the Alma is, I guess you would say, the most commonly reported throughout Europe. It is covered in thick, dark brown or reddish brown, yellowish, or black hair. So here's the deal. It can come in a few different colors, guys, just like animals, just like humans. It has this hair all over its body, except the hands, face with the Alma. And oftentimes it's described as having a thick beard, which is kind of a deviation from, good old Sasquatch. Although, I guess there's been a couple reports that, anyway, don't matter. The description of Yeti is not much different from the Almas, with the addition of white fur. So the Yetis are also known to be white with their fur or their hair, and the Almas not so much. But another interesting fact that distinguishes these creatures, the Yeti or whatever you want to call it, from the American Bigfoot, besides being far more aggressive, is the height. And we do have some reports of Yeti reaching into the 8-foot territory, but the majority of the reports concerning the height of both the Yeti and the Alma is between 6 and 7 foot tall. And as we know, with most Bigfoot reports, they are 8 to 9, sometimes even taller. Which, I mean, can it just shrink a little? That's too much. I mean, why do you need to have a person cry when they see a huge ape? And now I should note one other distinction between the Alma and the Yeti. The Alma is considered to be more, I guess, human-like. I guess you could say not as primitive or ape-like as the Yeti. But again, they share many similarities. They are large in stature, far stronger than a human, able to endure, the harsh, blistering winters up in the mountains of Russia. But and they do this without clothing. Their speed, their agility, they share many similar attributes. So if they are not the same species, I think the argument could be made that genetically they are very closely related, perhaps, as humans are to Neanderthals. But then again, a lot of times these animals are seen at a distance, guys. So, you could look at a person, a basketball player that's 7 foot tall from 300 yards away. One person might say, it looks like he's 6'6". The other person might say, hey, that guy's 8 foot tall. So it could be some of that as well. Now, when compiling the evidence, I guess you'd say, for tonight's show, knowing exactly where to start was probably the hardest aspect. And, should I start with the most prevalent stories and then work my way out from there? And ultimately, because I have OCD, I decided I would start at, the beginning, like that Rob Zombie song, start at the beginning. And if we're going to do that, the beginning would be the folklore. The stories of these creatures reach back about 2,500 years. Paintings, carvings, oral traditions have preserved the existence of these, let's say, wild men. Sadly, these offer little in the way of evidence in the eyes of academia. They will absolutely, accept the carving and the paintings of the camels that once lived in Russia 38,000 years ago. Yes, I'm talking about real cave paintings here. That's fine. They will quite literally accept every depiction of animals that are still alive. Yet when they come across something that does not fit into their accepted, geological record, that particular painting or carving, yeah, that's just a myth. We're going to ignore that one. But the rest, those are okay. They're good with us. So it would seem that we're going to need perhaps more than stories passed down from antiquity. And guess what? We have that. Absolutely. 1832. I said the beginning, Jerry. Gosh, I got my little bullet points ready. In 1832, James Princip's Journal of the I ain't going to be able to say that right. Anyway, this guy wrote a book about Trekker B.H. Hodgins' account in what he experienced in northern Nepal. His local guides spotted a tall bipedal creature covered with long dark hair, which seemed to flee in fear. Hodgson concluded it was an orangutan. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's a huge issue with Mr. Hodgson's explanation. The most blaring issue is that orangutans cannot survive winters. It would not have been anywhere near the location of this expedition. Secondly, this gentleman's guides were from the area and would be a more reliable source of explanation in regards to the creature that was seen. Then in 1870, the frozen wilderness between Georgia and Russia. Georgia, not the state in the United States, guys. This is a country. All right. So the frozen wilderness between Georgia and Russia was home to what could have been the greatest anthropological discovery of all time. Villagers in the area spoke about a prehistoric an ape woman living in the forest. And I'm going to keep this brief as I can. There was a Russian nobleman and merchant, Ganaba was his name, a frequent traveler to that region. He heard these stories about this wild female almasty or alma and decided to find this creature for himself. He hired a large group of villagers to accomplish this task, and shortly after, they succeeded. They brought this creature to this gentleman. Now, he kept her captive, much as we do with zoo animals, but eventually she became, I guess, domesticated. And he gave her the name Xana. That sound cool? And, as word of this travel, this man that domesticated a wild ape woman and almasty, it brought in many curious individuals, and thankfully, we have many reports confirming not only her existence, but also her physical appearance. So people documented that she was not human, but she was not completely animal either. She was 6.5 feet tall, with black skin cloaked entirely in thick auburn fur. Xana was also astonishingly strong. She was more muscular than any man and was far stronger. She is documented as being able to easily lift and carry 100-pound bags, the flour bags, with one hand. No issues at all. No human can do that. Anyway, not a, bodybuilder. But here's where it gets interesting. She would go out and run beside the horses. And to everyone's astonishment, she was faster than the horses. The frigid winters had no impact on her, many times preferring to sleep outside in the exposed winter air. People would bring her, clothing to wear, and she would just rip them up. She had no interest in dressing at all. And although she was able to, understand her, let's say, new name, the name that this gentleman gave her, despite 20 years of her life in captivity, she was never able to speak any human words. And, this part kind of gets me a little bit here when I think about this. Over the years after this happened, many have come forward with speculations about her ethnicity and ancestry because, hey, it has to be a human, right? The most prominent explanation was given to us in the 1950s. It's that Xana was an African woman. And that part really, okay. But the characteristics of her description, the fact that they would classify a 6.5 foot tall woman who people look at her face and say, that don't really look human. But I'm pretty sure they've probably seen Africans pass through before, especially when these people traveled from all over Russia to witness Xana. They know what an African looks like. And you're going to have to accept that we have a couple of anomalies for this to be an African woman. 6.5 foot tall is tall. Okay? But sure, it's possible. But that's one outlier. The second outlier, she doesn't have the ability to form human words. Now, if she was speaking in another human language, okay, I'm just trying to keep this simple, you would understand that it was a language. You would say that. But according to this, and everything I could dig up, she didn't say words. She made grunts and sounds. So you would have to assume, as some of the reports I read through, that she had she was, mentally handicapped. So now we have two outliers. Then she has a very rare disease, some people call werewolf or wolfman syndrome, where you develop hair all over your body, thick hair like fur. So now we have another outlier, but it wasn't black. It was auburn. So what is that now? 4 really odd things about this? Just saying. So to me, that idea, in my opinion, it screams racist. It really does, guys. And I'm not, one to jump on that bandwagon because that's not a good word to be thrown around. But in this situation, yeah. And, this creature, this female, she was female, didn't really have a great life. Sadly, because of the villagers. I know this is going to sound like a Jerry Springer episode, but she became an alcoholic. It was funny to them to give her wine and liquor. And then when this female, you almost want to say woman, but it wasn't by every description. This Alma, when she was in her drunken stupor, the many men in the village took advantage of that situation, if you know what I mean. So the story really doesn't get much better from here. Her first 2 children tragically died. She tried to bathe and clean the newborns in the icy river, the first one and then the second one, sometime later. And the cold water didn't bother her. She would bathe in it. But unfortunately for these 2 children, and by the way, she had 6 in total, but the first 2 that passed away, and actually all of them, genetically speaking, it would appear they were closer to the father's genetics or DNA. But those first 2 babies, they died of hypothermia. So that right there tells you that Xana was something quite different. So after witnessing this, the women in the village decided that they would take any other child and raise it in hopes that they could survive. Diane chimes in, didn't they take a photo of her? There is some debate about this. I'm glad you mentioned that. There's a picture going around, but that's actually of her granddaughter, White. It would be his daughter, if I recall correctly. There is another photo that looks very much a cross between, or let's say, a very much an archaic appearing human. And there's debate about the validity or the authenticity of that. Many say that it is absolutely correct, but it was damaged and retouched up, and that's the reason why the nose looks a little bit funky, I guess you'd say. But yeah, anybody can Google image of Zana, Z-A-N-A, and you will find these. So the villagers, like I said, the women decided they would take these children and raise them before she could try to bathe them in the icy rivers. And the most prominent of these children, actually, I just mentioned his name, Kuwait. In 2021, and I'm going to kind of get off track here, I'm going to kind of circle back. So in 2021, another genetic lab decided to tackle the question of Xana's ancestry. And I'm going to skip all of the boring parts, okay? They determined she was African. Literally, after everything I outlined earlier, that's what they're going with. And again, the issue is with the scientific community having an issue accepting this type of a species being out there. But that aside, let me start to pick apart their report. Ancient DNA, whenever they look at archaic DNA, regardless, it always comes in shorter fragments. And they always say it's because of damage. I would argue that might not be the situation, because this is something that is shared across all archaic human DNA. So all of it is damaged. But let me add this to it. Xana, who died approximately 1890, and her son, Kuwait, who died in 1954, both of their DNA seem to have this archaic damage, as they call it. See where I'm going with this? So they go on to lay out a case that, you know, she was nothing more than an African woman. Yet when you look at the composition of the DNA and you go back to the haplogroup, it is shared with the same modern day people that possess a large percentage of Denisovan DNA. I say Denisovan, English, British influence, Denisovan, but I will always say Denisovan. But you guys get what I'm saying here, right? But here's another issue. Many people share a haplogroup that dates back, 100 plus thousand years. And I'm going to give you an example using myself. I did a DNA test. Well, actually, I did a couple. And I discovered that I have an obscenely large percentage of Neanderthal DNA. So somewhere along my lineage, someone bred with a Neanderthal, that individual, right, that Neanderthal had a father. Let's say that Neanderthal, its father had 10 kids. One of them bred with a human that led to me. Hi. The other 9 continued breeding with Neanderthals for another 5,000 years. So what you need to understand is that somewhere in my lineage, there is a Neanderthal and a person that is 99% human with the same haplogroup. Get it? They share the same, 10 times great-grandfather. So Xana, she could have had the same haplogroup as these other people because of a shared ancestor, but been far less human as well. Something else I need to mention really quick that I found disturbing while researching the topics for tonight's episode and, learning about this, amazing discovery of Xana's remains. Because y'all need to understand that was recently they found her remains. That was just, a few years back. So they have her skeleton. They DNA tested it. And the fact that they discovered it should have been a big deal. There should be photographs all over. And I can't find any. I cannot find any photos of her skeletal remains. I cannot find the location of her skeleton or where it's being kept or the specifics about the company that did the latest DNA testing, or who provided them with the samples. Getting kind of weird, ain't it? I'm just saying, this isn't normal. And, I think I might know why this finding is being kept quiet. The reason why her remains are not on display. Again, I'm going to go back to Kuwait, her youngest son. His skull was given to anthropologist M.A. Oladeva. That's hard to say. Oladeva. Anyway, so she compared this man's skull to other, and I'm going to quote a lot of this, so it's going to sound kind of techie, but I'm going to keep it quick. You ready? Compared to other typical male skulls from Abkhazia, who found it to be significantly different from them, she wrote, the Takina skull exhibits an original combination of modern and ancient features. The facial section of the skull is significantly larger in comparison with the mean, meaning the average, Abkhaz type. All of the measurements and indices of the superciliary cranial contour are greater, not only than those of the mean, meaning the average, Abkhaz series, but also than those of the maximum size of fossil skulls studied, or rather were comparable with the latter. The Takina skull approaches closest the Neolithic Vani II skulls of the fossil series. Let me break it down for you. This anthropologist identified stark similarities between this individual skull, Dana's son, and Neanderthal or archaic human skulls such as Denisovan. There you go. For whatever reason, science tries to ignore the fact that humanity, us, we are not some pure race. I wish they would get off this. That mentality, guys, it was supposed to have died out in the 1930s, if you know what I'm saying, okay? All right. We do not have one straight line. There was interbreeding. If you doubt that, look at how many humans have Neanderthal, or Denisovan DNA. And up until we knew what Neanderthal DNA looked like, we would look at the DNA of humans whose ancestors bred with Neanderthal and thought nothing out of the ordinary. We did the same thing with those who have Denisovan DNA. And here's the deal. Geneticists undoubtedly know that every human alive today is a mixture of archaic species, but they don't care enough, probably because they don't want to lose their, government funding or suffer the repercussions to discuss, you can look this up, sequenced DNA that is abnormal within the human species. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of it. But, we don't have that original human, that original subspecies to compare it to. So that can't be what it is. Jeez. So for a while, I have hypothesized that Bigfoot is potentially a Denisovan. I have a couple theories. But let me put this out there. Humans, us, the largest molar, and you'll understand why I'm talking about this in a second. The tooth in the back of your mouth, the teeth back there, all the way in the back, it's about 1 centimeter at the widest. The largest, male gorilla, 6 foot tall, 500 pounds. Their molar comes in right about 2.5 centimeters. Denisovans are 5 centimeters. They were not small species. These weren't little guys. They've been trying to propose that and push that lately, that they were maybe the size of Neanderthal. Not a chance, guys. Not a chance. Science says we don't know the size of these hominids. We only have a few teeth and bone fragments. But I would argue, based on the size of the teeth, they were giants. They would fit the description of those Yeti or, Bigfoot. But another contender, another one that I'm on board with, Gigantopithecus. That would be so cool. So Gigantopithecus, or Blackie, actually, Gigantopithecus Blackie. Anyway, don't matter. Because there's two different types. I'm not going to geek out because I'll add 30 minutes to this episode. You know, the latest they lived, the absolute latest, was about 11,000 years ago. Some think they died out earlier. Some think they made it to about 11,000 years. Regardless, they lived beside humans. And, you know, I would argue they could still be among us. Scientists cannot agree if they were bipedal, you know, walking like humans, or more like chimpanzees, using their knuckles to scoot around on all fours. The consensus is that they stood between 9 and 12 feet tall and weighed up to, 1,100 pounds, just a half ton, no big deal. Now, more importantly, in my opinion, they would have been very intelligent. Gigantopithecus and orangutans split about 10 million years ago. Humans, orangutans, chimps, and bonobos split about 12 million years ago. So this thing is going to be closely related to orangutan, but much larger, meaning most likely a larger cranial capacity. Now, this is where it's going to get kind of fun. Most people interested in, Bigfoot, Yeti, Yowie, the host of names that are out there, Sasquatch, Skunk Ape. Most of them have heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Although I would say it is probably the most well-known incident, it is not alone. And on this, I'm going to get very detailed in regards to these events. So as I said earlier, this is going to be a longer episode. But if you like this topic, it's going to be worth sticking around, I promise. And honestly, I could probably do a 3-hour episode just on this specific incident. I'm not going to. But, with all of the theories surrounding what occurred. But like I said, I'm going to try and streamline this. Between February 1st and February 2nd, 1959, 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains. The verbiage has been changed over the years, but the original Russian coroner's report stated that they died from an unknown compelling force. You will see other terms used. I actually went back through these documents. I have Russian to English. This was not short for me to prepare for this episode, guys, because I wanted it to be as close to the actual verbiage utilized as it could be. So these young adults, they were experienced hikers from the Ural Polytechnical Institute and were led by Igor Dyatlov. They started their journey on foot about January 27th, 1959, and throughout the expedition, they kept detailed journals and took photos. And as I read through, yes, every page of every journal, I didn't read anything that stood out as being ominous to me, okay? There was a satirical page about the Yeti, but nothing that says they witnessed the Yeti. And I take from that what you will. People have said, there's proof they said this. That isn't what they said. It was kind of as a comedy thing, along with some other jokes within the satirical page that they put out, that they published. So, be it as it may. Now, 60 years after the incident occurred, the Russian government reopened the investigation and determined the cause of death was slab avalanche. There's some issues with this. The slope of the hill was not enough to allow for this type of avalanche to occur. Yes, there was snow on the tent, but the rescue team did not arrive for 26 days, so that was caused by snowfall. The rescuers did not see any signs of an avalanche, which would have been present, and such an avalanche should have occurred within moments of them digging into the snow before they even had their tent placed, and it did not. They have us believe it occurred hours after that was done. And these people, they grew up in this environment. They were experienced in this environment and at camping and hiking in winter. They knew what they were doing. But the real issue, in my opinion, with the avalanche hypothesis is this. The injuries that these people sustained, had that been done to them while they were sleeping in their tent by an avalanche, they would not have been able to evacuate. One thing I find particularly unusual is that just a few hundred yards away from where their tent was, they had a heavy tree line. I mean, it was heavily wooded area, and that would have offered far better protection from the winter winds, yet they chose to dig into the snow out in the open. And yes, if you're exposed, if there's no trees, then yeah, dig into the snow. It's actually a really good idea. It's a survival. You're taught this. But it's definitely suboptimal when you have trees just, a couple hundred yards away. You would not do that. You would have posted up in the tree line. And then you would have, I'm going to geek out here for a minute, you would have cut branches, layered them along another tree, stacked them to create a windbreak, a wall windbreak. And that's where you would have dropped your tent, not on the side of a slightly sloped hill. But, So what we do know for certain, though, is that some event occurred, most likely during the night of February 2nd, 1959. Whatever that event was, it prompted the hikers to cut their way out from their tent. And, along with that hole that they cut to escape, there were smaller slits, something you'd use to peer out from your tent if you were watching something out in the wild. If there's something going on outside of your tent you want to keep an eye on. Just a thought. When they evacuated, they left without proper clothing, only taking knives and 3 axes. Why would they take that? Interesting. Once freed from their tent, they didn't run to the trees for shelter. They didn't run towards a storage site. They buried, just a few hundred yards away, they buried clothing, supplies, food, things like this. They didn't run towards that. They didn't run to the woods. They literally ran as though they were being pursued. One of the searchers stated that when they dug them out, one of the bodies had a notebook in one hand and a pencil in the other. Colonel Ortyukov grabbed the notepad, looked at it, cursed, and said, "He's written nothing." And he seems to be the only one that has seen the notepad. And as of right now, since this incident, its whereabouts are unknown. It was never filed in with evidence. It was never seen by anyone else. It just disappeared for literally no good reason. And everyone else kept a journal. I know because I read them all. So I promise you something was written on that notepad, which is being suppressed from the public. And as I did with the journals, I also read through the coroner reports. And these are public. Anyone can look them up. Some of these get very graphic, and I'm going to keep it short and simple, okay? But we're going to get a little detailed. Yuri Doroshenko, right cheek, soft tissue covered with gray foam, gray liquid coming from his open mouth. Apparent cause is pulmonary edema. You got to understand, this is translated from Russian. They don't get quite as colorful as Americans do with their language, unless they're drunk. No, I'm joking. I have some really good Russian friends. They're probably like, Jerry, you will stop that now. Now, this is important, guys. It's going to sound weird that I'm talking about it. Amount of urine was 150 cubic centimeters. This volume is smaller than what would be expected in a case of death by hypothermia. The body was still making efforts to fight the freezing at the time of death. That's all verbatim, by the way. My addition is this man appeared to be severely beaten. On to the next. Yuri Ashenko also appeared to be severely beaten. My input, here's what the coroner stated. The amount of urine in the bladder was 500 cubic centimeters. Cause of death, hypothermia. The presence of skin between his teeth that was torn from his right hand suggests that Ivan Eshenko tried to stay on the he was clinging to a tree for dear life, by the way, tried to stay on the cedar tree as long as he could and tried to awaken his irresponsive hands by biting them, or he was trying to stifle a cry. That's verbatim. And this makes me think about some really tragic possibilities. This man was horrifically beaten, then climbed a tree to escape his attacker, then either to keep his hands from falling asleep so that he may, continue to cling to that tree high above the ground, or perhaps to keep from screaming out in terror, giving away his location. He literally bit through his hand. Moving on to the gentleman who this incident is named after, Igor Dyatlov. He perhaps survived the longest. I believe he cut clothes from some of the other dead bodies, people, to keep warm. He did appear to be beaten, but not as badly as the others, having no internal injuries. And the amount of urine in the bladder was about 1,000 cubic centimeters. And that is what you expect with death by hypothermia. You expect, depending on the size of the person, in average, even if it's a smaller female, you're still going to see at least 500. But if it's a guy, you're going to be in that 1,000 plus cubic centimeters. So his cause of death really was hypothermia. Zaneta Kilmogorova. Zaneta. That's a pretty name. Can't get that last name right, though. Kolmogorova. There we go. Beaten badly about her face. Amount of urine and bladder is about 300 cubic centimeter. Cause of death. Are you ready for this? Hypothermia due to violent accident. And I want someone to explain to me what that means. Seriously. Hypothermia due to violent accident. That's something unusual. Rustam Slobodin. Again, verbatim, fracture of the frontal bone and hemorrhages in the temporalis muscle that were found on the skull. That means his head was literally cracked open. Lyudmila Dubinina. Soft tissues are missing around eyes, eyebrows, nose bridge, and left cheekbone is partially exposed. Eye sockets are empty. Eyeballs are missing. Nose cartilages are broken and flattened. Soft tissue of the upper lip are missing. Teeth and upper jaw is exposed. And then heart was, so this is kind of a little bit of a breakdown here. The tongue is missing. Heart was beating and the blood was flowing when tongue was removed from her mouth. The cause of death, hemorrhage into right atrium of the heart, multiple fractured ribs, and internal bleeding. Okay. She was alive when her tongue was taken out because there was blood found in her belly, in her stomach. So she was very much, unfortunately, alive when whatever happened to her. And if this was from, a slab avalanche, how did she exit the tent and walk almost 100 yards? I think that's a real good question. Semyon Zolotarov. Again, eyeballs are missing. Missing soft tissue around left eyebrow, size 7 by 6 centimeters. Bone is exposed. Open wound on the right side of the skull with exposed bone, 8 by 6 centimeters in size. Flail chest, multiple broken ribs. And this is the hiker that had the notebook with nothing in it, allegedly. He was also carrying a camera around his neck. And supposedly, the film was damaged. So my question is, nobody else took the camera with them except for him. What was so important that he felt he needed that to survive? And despite all that, allegedly, the film was damaged and, no photos came of it. Anyway, Alexander Olavatov, Diane, something bit their face off. Could be something. And you ready for this one? Lack of soft tissues around eyes. Eyebrows are missing. Skull bones are exposed. The bridge of the nose is straight. The nose cartilage is soft when palpated and has unusual mobility. The base of the nose is flattened with the nostrils compressed. Deformed neck. You know what that means? This man was severely beaten, and then his neck was snapped. These people died horribly. Nikolai Thibault Brignoli. I know I'm probably getting that wrong, and I apologize, Nikolai. Now, it is possible that this individual was outside of the tent when whatever occurred. He was warmly dressed with boots, or perhaps he was just prepared. Perhaps he's like, hey, there's something out there. I'm going to be ready. Yeah, I don't know. But his injuries were also very extensive. In quoting the coroner yet again, this is what he said. I do not believe these injuries could have been the result of Nikolai simply falling from the level of his own height, i.e., falling and hitting his head. The extensive, depressed, multi-splintered, broken fornix and base of the skull fracture could be the result of an impact of an automobile moving at high speed. So let me circle back to that avalanche hypothesis real quick. With the type of injuries outlined from the coroner's report, many of these people would not have survived to have been able to exit their tent. I mean, they wouldn't have moved. They would have been done right there. Many of these people have defensive injuries. Almost all of them talk about injuries to the hands, to the back of the hands. And something else worth mentioning, large primates, when they do kill animals, and they do, and sometimes humans, guys, just so you know, they do it by pounding them and crushing them and breaking their necks. They do that. And ironically, that ape that was just folklore until 2003, the Billy ape, that's how it kills animals. It breaks their necks. Just saying. Most of the injuries sustained by this group, they would appear to have died this way, unfortunately. You know, again, usually primates will also bite. The coroner did not identify bite marks, but as Diane chimed in, it kind of does sound like something tried to bite their faces off, doesn't it? So is it possible that an enraged Yeti stalked this group? The local Mensi tribe, it's a tribe there at the mountains, they warned the group about these creatures. They told them, hey, these are territorial. Guys, do not go where y'all are thinking about going. Bad things can happen to you. But, you know, hey, humans are dumb. What did we do? You know, I mean, let's be honest. And you know, as I was preparing for this episode, because I will try to pull sources from everywhere I can, I came across a documentary on HBO about some incidents which occurred in Russia and possibly pertains to the Yeti. They did mention the Dyatlov Pass, a couple other things. But this one I found interesting, and I'm not even like 100% on board with it. Not at all. I just, it really piqued my curiosity, though, about what could have occurred. And it's known as the Kamar Daban incident. And so there's I guess we're going to say a very interesting idea of how this could be connected to the abominable snowman. I like that word. You know, and again, I don't know if I'm on board with this, but I figured I would briefly mention it, and I'll geek out a little bit if you don't mind. I'm going to keep it short. Lyudmila, a 41-year-old teacher who was also a survivalist, took 6 of her students to hike over the Alps. Basically, the first 2 days, everything went smoothly. According to Valya, the only survivor, this is what she says. After the group had breakfast, they began their descent down the mountain, but a calamity struck shortly after. Sasha, one of the students, who was at the time at the back of the group, began screaming. When everyone turned to look at him, he was foaming at the mouth and bleeding from his eyes and ears. He fell to the ground, convulsing before becoming still. Lyudmila ran to his aid and instructed the others to continue on to find help. So as she said, as this lady recounted, Lyudmila was deeply distressed and desperately tried to revive Sasha, but she too began exhibiting the same symptoms as him. So the rest of the group, they hadn't gone very far before they heard her, the teacher, screaming, and quickly they all ran back, and they found her, the 41-year-old instructor, bleeding from her eyes and her nose while foaming at the mouth and shaking uncontrollably. So Tatiana, the first to reach the teacher, she also began to exhibit symptoms and began grabbing her throat as if she were struggling to breathe. She then, this is creepy, made her way to a nearby rock and struck her head against it repeatedly until she lost consciousness. Dennis took cover behind a rock while Timur and Victoria ran away. Vala was left, motionless after witnessing her three closest friends die in a matter of minutes. Victoria and Timur collapsed while running and died in a similar way, tearing their clothes, coughing up blood, and clawing at their throats. Valia and Dennis ran away from the area, but soon after, Dennis collapsed as well, and in the end, essentially, only Vala survived to tell the story. And you might be wondering, Jerry, what does this have to do with Bigfoot? That was the same question that I was thinking. Then they proposed the hypothesis that this creature can utilize infrasound. This is something that we see used by predators in the wild. It stuns prey. But, to cause hemorrhaging in its victim, this is something that hasn't been seen. And the geek I am, I decided, hey, I would see what would be required, I guess you would say, to cause the symptoms of these hikers utilizing infrasound. And this is what I came up with after scouring the internet. The optimal frequency is between 7 hertz and at between 180 and 200 decibels. Hey, louder's better, but 180 is going to get the job done. Honestly, a little bit lower than that at 7 hertz, even in the 160s, it's going to get it done, but it's going to take much longer. The outline is it needs to be at the right hertz, at the right decibel, to within moments cause this type of, or these types of symptoms, rapidly. And to do it rapidly, what you would need is 7 hertz, no less than 180 decibels. And if that were achieved, if that were a weapon, you literally would not hear the sound that was very quickly killing you. Now, no land animals can surpass 140 decibels. However, the blue whale and the pistol shrimp can both exceed 200. The blue whale actually breaks 230 decibels. Now, the coroner here said that the cause of death was hypothermia and protein deficiency. That is absurd. Neither of those will cause, coordinated, spontaneous hemorrhaging. These people were all exposed to the same thing at nearly the same time and, within the same area. Another hypothesis is that they were exposed to Novichok nerve agent that Russia developed about the same time too. But in my opinion, that is equally as preposterous. No one would have survived and no one would have hemorrhaged. That's not the symptoms. So is it possible that a Yeti could have done this? I mean, that's the question, right? A bulldog bat can reach 140 decibels, which is only about 40 decibels less than the required 180. Many animals can produce vocalizations low enough to kill if they were louder, including elephants and sharks. More importantly, mountain gorillas. If this animal is a relative of apes, then I guess the question is, could this actually be possible? And really, that's a horrifying thought, isn't it? When you think about it, Diane chimes in, dolphins. Yes. Yeah, a dolphin can do this thing where if you're in the water with it, it will hurt you very much badly without touching you. It's really weird. So we're talking about something that can do that on the land. But does this qualify as evidence? Are the events that played out with this group proof that, the Yeti lives, that a large unknown primate is really out there? Hey, to some, perhaps it is. Personally, I find it compelling, perhaps a piece to a larger puzzle. With the Pentagon paper stating that, Bigfoot is out there, in my opinion, that alone should be enough. But, I suppose if we had other countries verifying its existence, it would add more validity, right? Well, guess what? We have that. But wait, there's more. ShamWow. Oh, Lord. Before I get on to this, I really want to take a moment here, guys. I want to mention how incredibly difficult it is to find these reports online. Like, even with DuckDuckGo, I had a hard time. You need to pretty much know the names and the dates of these occurrences or you'll get nothing. If these things fascinate you, if this topic fascinates you, you need to go online, watch all the videos you can, take the information that you garner from those videos, cross-check it, because then you'll have the names and the dates, and then verify the validity of what you heard on that episode. Do it with me. I give you all enough to look it up. Verify the validity of what I'm telling you as well. So you really kind of have to know where to start, and I'm going to give that to you. I guess Nazi Germany, why not? 1938, they sent a team into Tibet. When you try to look this up online, there's a whole host of reasons why they went, and they say that they found a bear, which is, the cause for the Yeti sightings, which is just, words I can't say here. But there are contradictory documents. And also they sent an anthropologist with them on this expedition. And, that particular field of research, this is going to confuse you, but it'll make sense in a second. It does pertain to primitive humans. And you might wonder why they didn't send like a primatologist, right? And the answer is really simple. In 1930, an anthropologist also studied primatology. There was no separation in the 30s, okay? The two fields were essentially one. So in 1938, if you wanted to send someone knowledgeable about primates and archaic humans, and the Nazis were going through the Himalayas, they were up there looking for the pure, snowy superhumans that led to regular humans. That's what they were looking for. They were up there to find a primitive human, an archaic human. And that's why they sent an anthropologist, which is what you would send if you were looking for this type of evidence back in 1938. So when it comes to conclusive, verifiable facts about what occurred, unfortunately, we are left with many questions. That's the truth. There are stories that they found something. There are stories that they engaged something at the entrance of a cave, which in many ways resemble the Alma, the Almasti, the Menk, the Yeti, whatever you want to call it. Perhaps it was a male version of Xana. This creature ran towards the soldiers with, they said, a stick. I'm assuming it's a club. I don't know. There's really no definitive description, but they killed it. That's what the report is. So in regards to, Russia, with the Russians, we do have some compelling evidence. Why they're my favorite? No. The Yeti, not the Russians. Oh, no. Okay. Hey, if nothing else, those guys kept darn good documents, and the KGB just let all them secrets out a couple years back. So, hey, good on them. So we have declassified government papers verified that Marshal Pavel Rybalko, 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 he was a Soviet tank leader. This man carried a snowman-like creature in a railroad freight car for several days in 1939 during the fight against the Japanese in the Soviet Far East. In addition to that, We also have documents stating that Major General Alexander Topilsky, Topilsky, found a dead, as they said, snowman following a shootout with White Russian troops at the Russian Civil War in the 1920s. So, moving on. And I'm just going to hit some bullet points here, guys. And Christy says, hi. That's my wife. Hi. 1988, Igor Tatzel, a Russian scientist, told the official TASS, that's the Russian news agency, that his expedition recorded several nocturnal sightings of the abominable snowman during a December visit to the Pamir Mountains near the border with Afghanistan. He said the creature paid frequent visits to the researchers' camp in an apparent effort to become friends. Tatzel, T-A-T-S-L, said the snowman, which he has seen in the twilight 90 feet away, appears shy. But the increasing frequent visits by the Yeti to the vicinity of the camp are evidence that it is showing an interest in us and attempting, even if timidly, to make contact. And that's all verbatim from this gentleman. But he's not alone. Same time, same month, same year, the Ukrainians reported a very similar, dare I say, identical creature. So they weren't alone in this. And every year, and if you're fascinated by Bigfoot topics, I'm sure you watch them just as I do. Every year, videos, I mean lots, or reports, videos or reports come flowing out of Russia about Yeti sightings. In addition to, average citizens, these reports also come from scientists, government and police officials. And the reality here, though, is that Russia has remote villages and populations that live very primitive lives. Some people like to watch these types of shows on the History or Discovery Channel, mountain men. That's how a lot of these people live up there. They don't have the means to take videos or make reports or jump on, Instagram or TikTok or whatever the case might be. And something else perhaps sinister has been occurring for hundreds of years in Russia. Small villages completely abandoned. And yes, villages, and it's been talked about, hey, this or that, and they relocate it. That's fine. This is something different we're talking about here. It's usually small villages with under 100 residents, usually, believe it or not, yes, villages, 25 people, 30 people, 50 people. That's a real thing. But suddenly, like for no reason, they just vanish. This has been documented. They did not relocate. They didn't, move to the next village 8 miles over. They just vanished. Russia doesn't talk about these events. The government doesn't, hey, this ain't worth mentioning. No. They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to scare people. Why would they? They also don't want to talk about over 25,000 people every year that are just simply erased from existence, plucked from the wilderness. No, that shouldn't be headline news, right? Not at all. And if these creatures exist, right, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, whatever they are, Denisovan, Gigantopithecus, some other archaic human, then those in Russia, they would be more violent. And the reason why is they have less food available than in the warmer climates. The cold would demand a higher intake of calories and protein. They would require meat. And humans are meat. Just so you know. You go out to the wilderness, you're not at the top of the food chain. And something else real quick before I wrap this up that fascinates me. That is, many times with Bigfoot sightings, they correlate with unusual lights in the sky. There are those that believe, these creatures are actually extraterrestrial, but hey, who knows? Possibly. I tend to think that they are some form of hominid or, something like that. And again, where I stand, Denisovan, Gigantopithecus, something along those lines. But then, when I think about those papers, those declassified files from the Defense Intelligence Agency out of the Pentagon, where it says that this planet is being visited and those beings and their craft are somehow responsible for these Bigfoot sightings. That's what they're telling us, not me. That's them. And not just Bigfoot, by the way. Cryptids in general. This is from their files, from our government. And having read that, it does seem that our government believes that there is some type of relationship between the two. So, are these creatures real? And if they are really out there, what are they? And more importantly, do they look at us as a food source? Just something to think about. I mean, if relationships were better, I would definitely love to go hike the mountains over in Russia and see what I could find. But the truth is, if these things are out there, I'm a little chunky, okay? They're not going to go after the skinny guy first. It's me. They're going to be looking at me. So if they are, I mean, I don't know. All right, everybody. That's all I got for tonight. It was a longer episode, like I said it would be. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much, but yeah, I know I got a little detailed on some of these things. Tomorrow, Gwendolyn Guthrie. She will be on with us at 1 p.m. It's going to be an early show tomorrow, 1 p.m. my time, Central Standard Time, and I am so excited because this is what she does. She is a cryptid huntress, so it's going to be pretty awesome. All right, cue the music, Sam. I don't know who Sam is, but don't you love that? All right, everyone. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mysteries After Dark. I have been your host, Jerry. Until next time, stay safe and goodbye.